Greetings, my friends. Today I want to read a lesson, a general, which I wrote some time ago, which was summing up the core idea of the many other lessons which I had given in the Schola Aetii before. So it is sort of a recapitulation and serves as such as an introduction, trying to be as brief as possible, highlighting the various points. The Philosophy of Aetius, an introduction in the new classic philosophy of Gaius, Florius, Aetius and his Schola Aetii. A few words in the beginning. The path to this point was long and had many sideways, but such is the work of the gods, that indeed they work in mysterious ways. The goal of this writing is to give a comprehensive overview on the philosophy which I am developing. The question I was asked in debates time and again, which classic philosophy I would rather count myself into. And I found that my views were so eclectic in other parts, so my own, that I usually ended feeling embarrassed not to be able to give a clear answer. Still, I know inside of my mind it had all grown into something of its own, and what remained to be done was forging the parts into a coherent one, seeking my own guidelines, applying them to the various questions, and so the answer today is, I am a follower of my own school of philosophy, that of Aetius, which is my Roman name. No made-up name would be so honest and clear as calling it after myself. So I regard myself as the first founder of the new classic philosophy, because I argue and work along the lines of and thoughts of pagan Hellenes and Romans. And since their schools were closed after the rise of Christianity, that development was halted. To be clear, I am not even remotely the equal of the great minds of the distant past. But as in any other reconstruction work, we have to begin somewhere. This is such a beginning as others, I hope, will and must build and continue. What is the aim and goal of a philosophy? Philosophy aims to create an explanation of the world. It is not focusing on just one element of knowledge, but it takes the whole matter of life, of existence and meaning into consideration. What I shall focus on in this introduction is knowledge itself, the nature of spirituality, religion, the nature of the gods, of the human soul, and of ethics, the idea of evil, and finally I shall write a chapter of demarcation against the other schools of thought, namely Epicurean, Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoa, and Christianity. A final note. I will a few times use German terms in brackets, for of course the outline of my philosophy was written in my own language, the language in which I was thinking, and it might be helpful when in later times people come back and know the terms as they were at first in my own language. Especially while I thought the German term may have a little bit a different emphasis, which in the English terms I do not entirely think they cover it the same way. Chapter 1 on Cognition. The beginning of every philosophy must be the question, what do we know and how can we know? German has this wonderful word called Erkenntnis, with kennen, knowing, in the sense of being familiar with. Like I know a person, a friend, for many years, it has a sense of a personal intimacy. Cognition is the central and first question in any philosophy, for simply asking, what do we actually know? Philosophy never creates truth. That is the aim of the natural sciences. They disassemble and dissect things, cut them into smaller pieces, and explain their mechanism. And while one may take that gathering of factual information as true, facts do not generate knowledge and wisdom. That is not to belittle the natural scientists, but from how the elements of the world are, we cannot conclude of what we should do, or what we could do. Nor is it the aim of true and classic philosophy to confine itself to mere fact-gathering. That is not our task as philosophers. We generate perspectives. We create narratives, maps of spiritual cartography, which the individual can use to navigate through life. And so the different philosophies are like different ways to travel. As such, it is important to note that truth is always and alone generated by the individual. There is no democratic process of generating truth, for that would merely be oppression. What is true for you as individual, because you were convinced with your own thinking. And then a set of ideas becomes the truth for you. It may be in part or entirely the factual truth as it is, but that you cannot know. What we can do, however, is agree as a society on a set of truths and establish them to guide us on our path together. And in all these, the philosopher is a helper or a midwife, like the holy Socrates used to say. Now, in the process of science, we may have critique and debate to test how true our ideas are. We test philosophical ideas in debate with others, just as the Hellenes did. But ultimately, it is the many individuals, each for himself, who are either convinced or not. There is no collective entity, like a magical summoned being, which decides. Society does not make decisions. People do. We adapt to a collectively held view as a matter of necessity, but the collective is not the generator of truth. Now, how does the individual generate truth? Basically, there are three ways. Through introspection, Innenschau, through the experience of your biography, and through logical deduction. These are the sources of information we have. The spiritual experience looking inward, the judgment about things which the life we live teaches us, the reason which enables us to think, to deduce. Fitting to these, we have three methods of improving the gathered series. We are formed from all these, and these are experience, Erfahrung, study, and comparison. Experience is practical. When we want to know more about the task, we do it. We experiment. Experience. When you want to know how the life of a miner is, you work as a miner for a time, and you gain understanding of the hardships. Second, there is study. That is what we do, for example, in schools and universities. We learn usually by the guide of a comprehensive and systematic nature. Like, for example, you go to the university and learn to become a historian or physicist. Finally, through comparison. And that usually means debate, talk, conversation. The classic philosophers held the Platonic dialogue in high regard. I personally prefer the Aristotelian form of dialogue, where in a longer session one side presents a coherent selection of ideas, and the speech is not so often interrupted. The Platonic dialogue is best done in actual talking, and while in writing it cuts the train of thoughts, in my personal view, too much, and makes the actual ideas sometimes difficult to follow, or worse, misleads the reader. Bound to the three ways of cognition are various systems generated in society. A. Introspection. The spiritual experience of the individual gathering spiritual systems and generating... A. Introspection. The spiritual experience of the individual generating spiritual systems and religion. B. Biography. The personal way to live, Lebensführung, generating forms of society and sets of collective assumed ethics. C. Deduction. Logical thinking of the individual generating systems of science and education. Being generated by the individual, philosophy remains an open process which is never finished. However, societies demand and need mandatory normative ideas to plan ahead, to have a cohesion, and so over time things generated by individuals will become established traditions, reflecting the grown nature of a collective of beings, and then has a gravity of its own, which nobody can easily overthrow or toss aside. It is a field of tension, the chaos of the individual and the need for order of the collective, wherein the balance of living philosophy lies. Part 2. Theology. The general question of theology is, how do we know of the spiritual matters? I will start this question as broadly as possible, hence the term spiritual matters. And I shall move on to the gods, in particular in the next chapter. We have three possible sources to know of spiritual matters. First, from observing the world and drawing conclusions. Second, from spiritual introspection and spiritual experiences like visions, dreams, or omens. And finally, from the memory of our divine origin. A. Observation. Drawing conclusions about the matter of spirituality is the most mundane way. It is not a bad way, but it has its limitations. Now, observing the world and concluding on the spiritual or divine requires one step before, and that is the acceptance what is known as the Hermetic paradigm, which simplified says, as above, so below. This means we have to assume and accept that the world of the spiritual and the world of matter are not either entirely disconnected or entirely alien to one another. It is an assumption based on experience and practicality. Experience tells us that the powers of the divine are interested in the world, and practicality leads us to assume that as a necessity for a spiritual or divine realm, totally different than that of the world, the mundus, would mean that powers of the beyond were disinterested and disconnected. And then we can forfeit the entire thing, which in the essence is just a thinly veiled form of nihilism. Therein also lies the danger of devaluing the world, or even condemning the material world as a fallen, evil, or illusionary thing. And the pagan philosophy cannot go that way. For the pagan, the world is sanctified by the presence of the spiritual and the divine in it. As such, the world must reflect the divine or higher planes in some way. So we see the turning of the seasons, the cycle of day and night, the waxing and waning of the moon, the ever-radiant light of the sun and the other elements of the cosmos as parables and hints towards the realm of spirituality. B. Vision. It is a strange fact that the gods tend to be picky. I have written a lecture about the topic, Lesson 2, Why the Gods Only Speak to Some. Every religion is founded by seers. There are always individuals who start the whole thing, even though mostly we have them forgotten, since the seers and shamans of the distant past lived long before people wrote down things. But there are always those who have a connection to the divine, and the divine that prefers some individuals for reasons we cannot entirely fathom. Now people may learn techniques of the seer or shamanic practices to consult the gods, and thus lineages are upheld. But it is not a path everyone can succeed on. Apparently it is the way of the gods to speak through some, and then others are put in the situation to be tested in their trust, as well as in the difficult duty to discern who is a seer and who is a crook. But it is also a matter of the division of labor. People become experts in what they do. When they focus on one thing, and with being a seer, it is the same. Learning to commune with the gods, and the gods establishing a trust connecting to a seer, is such an arduous task for both parties involved. The gods simply can't do it with every person that lives. The connection to the divine is also a strenuous task, not one everyone could or would endure. Over time, then, from the early seers and shamans, societies try to formalize consulting the gods and then develop artificial methods of divination. And so we have the two forms of divining the will of the gods: natural, through vision, and exalted mind, like a trance, and artificial divination, like bird flight, augury, the I Ching, the tarot, or anything like that. Though it is clear that the artificial follows after the natural method, for without the guidance of the seers, the people would never be able to create artificial methods of divination in the first place. For me, both ways of divination are equal in value. Each has their strength and weakness. Now, of course, the challenge with the seers is that we are in the situation to judge who is an actual seer and who is a crook or madman. Well, sometimes we also know the gods speak indeed through the mind of the mad. But we have to apply common sense here, of course. Seers can and must be trained. They need to be rooted in a tradition, but ultimately it is not up to man to command the gods not to speak through seers. Our gods are the living gods, and that implies that they never stop speaking to us. Since the gods are interested in us and our well-being, they will not wait for us to consult them, but will send signs and omens, seers and prophets to guide us, to give us hints in challenging times and situations. C. Our divine memory. Plato wrote in his book Phaedros on beauty that the human soul was once in the company of the gods, that in the divine realm is the origin of the human soul, which is one reason why we love all that is beautiful in the world, for it reminds us of the beauty of the divine home from where we came. That is also how the world is not a fallen place, but despite the reality, it has limited us and remains a place of trial and challenge. It also reflects the higher planes, and so we are reminded of the divine principles in the world, and so we are drawn to beauty and harmony. We love the sunrise and the peaceful waves of the ocean, the smell of the clean air and the green grass, the golden corn in the wind, the majestic mountains and the eagles circling around them, and all the great things of the world, but also each other, the beauty of man, the beauty of things we shape in accordance to the harmony we remember in the elevated forms of art we create, a piece of music, a painting, a sculpture, a building of great architectural value. All these also remind us of the beauty of the divine, which we loved so much and from where we came. It is therefore the error of the Neoplatonists who, maybe under the influence of the Oriental religions rising, condemned the material world as one of evil, fallen place, as a mere trap to be condemned and a root of sin. No, for the pagan philosopher, the world is sanctified by the divine, where the higher places are not some alien outside, but interwoven and connected with the mundus, with the mundane world, being a reflection and manifestation of the divine, although in lower lesser form, but it remains a parable, a place full of wondrous hints and teachings to anyone with open eyes. In matter, the divine is like a reflection, a painting or a sculpture. Like the painting is just a momentary view of a living entity, immovable and stagnate. It still reflects and reminds us of the living gods who are the arbiters of the cosmos. And as it is written by Plato in Phaedros, since every human soul was in the entourage of another god, so groups of people have different memories of what is beautiful, of what is right, and so souls of similar nature are drawn together, while some are solar, others are lunar, or martial, or Jupiterian, or in justice, or Dionysian in liberty, or whatever the gods it was whose realm his soul came from. Chapter 3. The nature of the gods. One of the main differences between paganism and monotheism is less the number of gods, but the role of the divine. Here I can only highly recommend the book of Alain de Benoist on being a pagan, since it highlights the differences between pagan spirituality and the Christian spirituality. In Christianity, like in all the three monotheist book religions, God is an alien to creation, an outsider and basically being devoid of character. He does not partake in the creation, and creation has a beginning and an ending. In paganism, the cosmos is endless. It did not start and never ends. Although there are large cycles, they are like the seasons and return of the ever-same eternal pattern. The gods are part of the cosmos, and as such, the cosmos or the world reflect the divine beings. I personally found it a grave error how Neoplatonism developed into a dualistic, world-denouncing ideology in its later phase, branding the mundus as something fallen. It may be under the pressure of Christianity or not, but it is a view on the world which I most fundamentally disagree with, even on the point of regarding it as dangerous. The world is sanctified by the presence of the gods. Of divine beings and spirits, the spiritual world and the material world are interwoven, not like a duality of good and evil. Similarly, I do not share the view of one God, as it was implied in Neoplatonism. Polytheism and paganism celebrate the diversity of the cosmos, or to take a phrase from the Vulcan philosophy, infinite diversity in infinite combinations. That is why a plurality of gods is a superior religious idea, because it truly reflects the facts of life. It is wholesome exactly because we have a greater number of gods. Especially as Romans, the number of gods really is quite large. Even though we have the Dodekatheon, the 12 gods, as the core of our religion, we Romans have truly never been short of gods and goddesses of every detail of the cosmos. It is this diverse plurality which is our strength, and I regard the notion to declare all gods as mere variants of one god as unpagan and contrary to our spirituality. We have the plurality of the living gods, and we rejoice in that. There is no need to artificially declare them one, and there would be nothing gained by doing so. But that does not mean the gods are chaos. For Jupiter, Zeus is the Logos, the guiding principle of order in the cosmos. Gods are at the same time principles and beings or personalities. It is right that Plato viewed the gods as eternal principles, but there lies the danger of hollowing out their personality, which would lead us away from living spirituality and invoke the danger of having a coagulated religion, which only has form but no living content. I am characterizing the gods by 7 qualities. First, the gods are eternal, like the cosmos too. The word immortal is misplaced since it suggests a duality and with mortality. The gods are eternal. They exist forever, since the principles they are the embodiment of are unchanging and forever. Second, the gods are unchanging. Like the principle which they embody never changes, so is the nature of the gods. They may adapt to time in the way they present themselves to us, react to our needs, the situations of our cultures and our technological level, but the gods remain unchanging in their essence. 3. The gods are perfect in themselves and with each other. Each god is a perfectly balanced and harmonic being without inner conflict and contradictions. So are the gods as a whole. Any conflict we perceive is decided as a necessity act furthering our development. 4. The gods are unlimited. It was during the era of King Numa that the Romans had no images of the gods, because they believed depicting the unlimited gods in limited images would disgrace them. We learned it is okay with them, but it remains a mere face they choose to show us. Since they are unlimited and we are limited, we can never fully comprehend a god, but we have reason to believe they nurture or share some human characteristics insofar as to guide us properly. 5. The gods are the arbiters of all the worlds there are. Plato already presumed there are many other worlds and realities, and the gods are stewards of all of them. In what ways and under what names and faces the gods administer these other worlds, we do not know. 6. The gods are only a source of good. The gods want our prosperity, the various cultures of our worlds, as well as humanity as a whole. They are the gods of civilization. They want us to rise, to prosper, to rise spiritually and ethically. 7. The gods are an unlimited source of abundance. The gods have no needs, no necessity, and take our offerings and sacrifices as a gesture of our love and dedication. But the gods are unending, abundant, and have as such no needs from our side. We can tell that the gods are interested in individuals as well as collectives, though their motivations in these are different. A seer or priest may be able to attain a contact with a god or a daimon sent by a god, and often that is for the purpose of developing a certain individual. What greater goals the gods seek by doing so is often hard to tell. The gods plan in the very long run, and so any piece moved today may contribute to events decades or centuries later. But I also assume from my personal experience that the gods are social, not unlike humans, and in that sense they enjoy exchange, while they mostly prefer to be in exchange with each other, and the other daimons serving them. Both history and experience tell us that time and again individual gods find the connection with some human beings interesting in itself. The connection of gods and men as collective is defined by the do ut des. I give, so you give. The gods do not force themselves upon us. They tend, in fact, to more make themselves scarce, and rather want to see effort from our side. When we disregard the gods as a culture, the gods focus to play in the background and move a piece here and a piece there, ever to test us, and when we put ourselves onto a dark road, they give us signs and omens, send us enlightened people or madmen to show us the danger we put ourselves in. The gods work mainly through opening our understanding. But we must accept the perspective given to us by them. If we reject them, they focus on other people and other developments. Or they may just wait how we play the cards given, and intervene at any future time of their choosing. The orderly form of the relation between gods and men is the cultus, the organized religion which serves a culture, a society, a civilization to prosper and to develop under the guidance of the gods. Such a religion must attain a balance between the liberty of the individual and desire to find a connection to the divine in a personal manner, in form of individual spirituality, and the need of the social collective to have similar norms and experiences through the religious practices. Chapter 4. The human soul. Socrates has spoken at length why he assumes the human soul to be immortal, and the largest writing is in Plato's Phaedron. Like the vast majority of all religious and spiritual teachings, I too take the human soul as immortal. The soul of all beings comes from the realm of ideas, and so essentially comes from the divine itself. And since the divine is unchanging in contrast to the changing world, the mundus, the souls of all beings are immortal, including the souls of plants and animals. Nothing that is ever truly vanishes. Like Plato wrote in Phaedros on beauty, I regard the human soul were once in the entourage of the gods, each soul of a different god, but since our souls are not perfectly balanced like that of the gods, our soul chariot is difficult to handle, difficult to remain in the high planes of the divine, and so some sank down. Now, since we assume the gods benevolent, and since nothing develops that is not the will of the gods, I do not see this as a punishment or fall, but rather a great plan, and we are a part of it. Life is a test, a plane where we are taught things we need to learn, but we are also teachers. We are all sort of the divine spark sent down to matter to elevate the material world. We are, so to speak, the falling angel touching the rising animal. Our souls came from the divine to elevate the dead matter. Insofar, I even assume it is implied in the will of the gods that we spread life and civilization beyond Earth, into the universe, to one day populate other planets with the life forms of our world, to spread light and life by developing technology that enables us to true space travel. Some may find it a stretch, and most pagans are not used to think of technology as connected to the gods. But I beg to differ. We have Minerva, the goddess of intelligence and invention, Mercurius and Vulcan, and many gods who stand for technological progress. But beyond that, our souls descended from the heavens to spread the light into the darkness of the material universe, both by bettering life on this planet, but also by extending life beyond this planet. Since the gods are a plurality, and each soul was in the company of another god, so the gods desire a true diversity of cultures, and so they are creators of the tribes and groups of peoples forming societies and collectives based on similar natures, and so the memory of the human soul determines its character and to what any human being is drawn to. So one form, a company of Mars, may be more warlike, while those from the entourage of Minerva are scientific. Those from Vulcan love to craft and are practical. Those coming from the realm of Apollo are lovers of the solar principle, seeking harmony in the arts and so forth. I'm personally quite fond of the story of the dual soul of humanity, which is related in Plato's Symposium. There it is said that humans originally were the unity of two beings, but since the gods assumed them to be too powerful, or if you read it different, too perfect, having no room to seeking development, humans were split. Now some of these dual souls were two men, some were two women, and others were a man and a woman. And so each seeks a gender in love to which he was connected. I find this a very endearing idea, and it shows how deeply the classic thinkers respected love and romance, the gifts of Cupid, as one of the most primordial gods. The aim of the human soul is as such the return to the divine realm from whence it came. Whether this is a sort of salvation or an endless cycle is up to everyone to decide. I assume it is the former for some and the latter for others, as the individual character may be. Some may desire to forever return to the divine realm at the sight of the gods and leave the tribulations of the mundus behind. Others may prefer a rest among the heavens, only to forever return. It is clear that in this view life is vast, a series of reincarnations, and I reject the idea of merely one life. Just gods and one life is not really a compatible idea, so reincarnation is essentially a compelling logic deduction. The soul rises up first to the in-between realms of the daimon, and then to the divine home. This is achieved by gradually spiritual growth, by heeding the religious practices, and by leading a good life of ethicality. These three are necessarily connected and cannot be separated. The spiritual growth is achieved in many ways: meditation, inner working, personal rituals, and so forth. But it must be connected to the religious practices of your culture or your choice, for otherwise it would be selfish and be at the risk of losing the grounding. Finally, there can be no true spiritual development if you do neglect your duties in the world. Growing beyond the chaos of the world does not relieve you of the duties you have as a citizen of the world. So you need to cultivate your life, better the life around you, and contribute to help others. Spirituality is the harmonization of the conflicting, imbalanced forces inside of you and in the world. The personal spirituality is often taught in the various mystery schools, each focusing on different paths to teach people. There exist basically three greater pagan mysteries: the mystery of the Earth Mother, the mystery of the Sun, and the mystery of the Moon. The solar is the male mystery, the lunar is the female mystery, and these two paths I regard as the most important pathways to develop spirituality, each with their own strengths and shortcomings. While the earth cults are noble and powerful, they are not as open to us anymore as to the people of the past. As a modern city dweller, with the high-tech comfort and the 21st century, we have a difficult time to really connect to the agricultural reality of the people of the past. And there are, of course, many other concepts of mystery cults, but I write about these in detail in a lesson in the future. Human nature, as it is made up of three different parts: reason, emotion, and will. If you think of it as a chariot, reason and emotion are like two horses, which potentially pulling in different direction, and it is the task of the will to command these two in harmony. Consequently, we have two different sets of ethics. One system of ethics stems from reason, that is the method of logic, and it applies to look mainly for the results of what we do. The other set of ethics is rooted in our emotion, through the way of empathy, and it looks mainly for the well-being of others. One may say emotion is the individual chaos, for we all feel different, while reason is order, since through logic we all can come to relatable systems of action. Through reason we create a social order in which we collectively can live, but through our emotions we are individual, diverse, and different. The will has to organize this chaos and order into balance, taming both elements and enabling harmonic movement ahead, both for the individual as well as for society. Chapter 5: The Concept of Evil. Evil is not a pagan term. Evil insinuates something that is in itself contrary to good, like something that opposes what is good as an aim in itself. And that is not what we can observe. What we can observe in the world is a will that serves itself and whose trajectory is harmful to us. B. A will that is ignorant and intellectually in the dark. C. A will that is indeed malevolent, but then essentially it is sick. It is both expressed by Plato and Aristotle that all beings aim for a good, and therefore it is clear to say that good is what all beings aim for, and I share this view. Now the first case is quite easy when two people aim for a good, but these are in contradiction. Like there is a shortage of any good, and several people want it, then there is conflict. That is where we perceive evil, but it is only relative. Second, we have people who act harmful, often without having any true benefit, because they do not understand the matter. That is the evil caused by people being ignorant, either being ignorant as such, or being misled and manipulated by others for their own profit. In that case, we've actually, again, case A, a conflict of trajectories, only that others are made the tool of a few. Finally, there is destructive malevolence born out of a psychological damage. Now, it may be that in cases such a damage of the psyche cannot be healed, or is of such a grand scale that we will forfeit compassion, like in the case of historic mass murderers, whose actions killed millions. Nonetheless, we have a deformation of the soul here, and I think the loaded term evil must be used with great care. There is no evil in the same sense in pagan philosophy as in the Christian or monotheist religions. However, there are of course destructive forces and beings who oppose the ordering and light forces of the Logos, Jupiter, and thus the benevolent guidance of the gods. These are dark entities, of which I shall not speak in detail. Safe to say, such destructive entities do exist. And even though they have no chance to overthrow the cosmic order, we are tested by them, challenged by them, and so we must remain vigilant and alert. They appear inside of us just as much as in the world, and so the struggle is both external and internal. It can actually be quite risky to see the evil forces too much only in the outside, and all too quickly you are overtaken by dark demons of yourself. Destructive forces are spreading miasma, a negative energy which religious work can and must remove. That is why the idea of cleaning is such an important concept in all religions and systems of spirituality. It is a very complex topic, and I just wanted to mention that there are actually destructive forces in the cosmos who aim to taint our spirituality, drag us down and devolute our fall, so we must be alert and on guard. But since it is a complex topic, I shall forward you about it to lesson 8 and 10 at my writing The Gods of Madness. Chapter 6. Demarcation against the other schools of thought. No school of thought or philosophy can exist without setting a sort of demarcation against the other schools. Now I highly suggest that each student of philosophy broadens his horizon, and especially the classic authors should be read thoroughly. Above all, Plutarch, Cicero, and Plato. This final writing will show where the Schola Aetii differs from the other philosophies and how far it refers to them. 1. Epicurus. I shall not go into great detail on Epicurus. Both Cicero and Plutarch have written at length why the Epicurean philosophy is a dead end. In the essence, the Epicurean philosophy leads to an apathetic hedonism, an avoidance of difficulties, and as such it robs people of spiritual growth. Life focused on avoiding pain as a main motivation would end in a nihilist stagnation and devoids life of value and ethos. It is a thinly veiled atheism to justify laziness, cowardice, and apathy. I shall not spend more time on refuting it, since Plutarch and Cicero have done so well enough. 2. Plato. Plato is probably the philosopher from which I drew the most, but there is enough I disagree on with what prevents me from calling myself Platonist by any stretch of the word. One thing that has come clear to me, especially when I see the roots of the system in Socrates, that Platonism is much more a spiritual revelation, or at least has it as its core. That is a view of the classic philosopher denied or did not want to see. But if you really follow the arguments of Socrates, then it becomes quite clear how far these basic concepts are derived from spiritual introspection, or his daimon, as he often refers to it. The entire concept of ideas and true ideas being understood through thinking is highly problematic, if not misleading, if we understand it in the logocentric way of modern thought, like reasoning on a topic. The true idea of something which Socrates introduced is not an idea we can entirely grasp through logic. It is something we more feel intuitively by long trained and experienced spiritual introspection. As such, it has first and foremost, for me, a truth as individual, and since it is so, I cannot follow Plato in the idea to base an entire society like a republic merely on the spiritual introspection of one man, even be it Plato or Socrates himself. In the writings of Plato lurks always the danger of what I call the logocentrism of the West. So I take the word for one thing and assume that only because words exists, it must have meaning. I refer here again to my writing, which is of importance of that matter, The Gods of Madness, the Danger of Logocentric Western Culture, which is, if I may make a personal addition here, one of the things why I am skeptical of putting philosophy too much on words built on words. I have said this in conversation time and again I refer to you on this criticism of the logocentric Western culture writing which I have written. The problem is what Plato or Socrates see in the introspection as true justice or true virtue may not be the same as what others see when they introspect. And while sure true ideas exist, since the gods, for example, are truly good, we cannot entirely fathom the gods, and neither the true ideas. They remain largely outside the logical understanding, and we can only partially grasp them. That does not know the knowledge of the true idea remains agnostically hidden forever, but we can only circle around them, understand some part at a time. I am most emphatically against the world denial that Neoplatonism has heralded, as I have written before. I regard dualism of emphasizing a split of spirit and world as something deeply or even anti-pagan in nature. Whether it was under the influence of Christianity or love for Oriental dualism, I do not know. I see the world as sanctified by the gods and spirits. The world as an arena where we learn and teach, ultimately learn to grow. I see the mundus as a reflection of the divine. And this Neoplatonist contempt of the material world is something I profoundly reject. Aristotle. I hold Aristotle personally in the highest regard of the classic Hellenic philosophers, even though I personally have not much in common with his thinking. But I found the scientific method, the method of logic, and despite all my critique of making logic a sort of tyrannical overlord, I value logic as a servant that guides us under our will. The teachings of Aristotle have made the Western culture more unique and different than probably any other individual thinker. But there is a dark side in Aristotle as well, where he basically justifies the status quo of society and has little or no desire for progress, unlike Plato. I laud his works on logic and reason and as a much-needed skill, but we should not cut the human mind in half. We are also beings of desires, of feelings, and sometimes we desire to experience excess, to learn of our limits. All in good measure is a great guide of virtue, and it comes from no less than my beloved Lord Apollo. But we are polytheists, and so we listen to the advice of the gods and their various points of view. An unchained reason can become a terror, a nightmare, where all ends in mediocrity, and a cold calculative reign of reason that has become the main problem of modern society at some point. Human beings desire more than orderly reason. We seek to reach for the stars, to challenge ourselves, to go beyond the safe and well-proven pathways of reason and logic. The Stoa. The Stoa is, without doubt, a noble philosophy which I hold in personal high regard. But it tends to be more a philosophy which reacts to a crisis than being a good guide to life in general. Let me try to explain. One source of Stoic writings comes from none other than Emperor Marcus Aurelius, his book Meditations. But I always had a hard time to read it. It breathes such depressive world weariness in many parts that I wonder how the personal life of the emperor justifies such a negative view on life. Sure, you can take the view that in the millennia of the cosmic time your life and action do not matter. But that is not really a helpful thing to deal with the reality of suffering. If one suffers greatly, what comfort is to say, in the face of millions of years, your suffering is meaningless? That is not the helpful advice of a philosopher. We take on responsibility. We act in life as if it matters. We take things on our shoulders and create things, accomplish things, both to better our life and the life of others, as good as we can. That seems much more helpful than this mental retreat which Marcus Aurelius so often seems to preach. The other great author is Seneca, and I found reading Seneca very worthwhile, mostly because he is a practical man, and I value the Stoa as such, a practical guide, though I do not see it as much as a true full-fledged philosophy, since most of the more philosophical paradigms seem quite absurd, like the notion of Zenon that all change is an illusion, and nothing ever truly changes. The best part of the Stoa are truly the advisory texts of Seneca. Seneca is a plaster put on the wound of the soul. It helps the soul to heal when you are hurt. But getting accustomed to walk with plasters and crutches makes you weak. To be pagan and to be Roman means to be heroic and dutiful. Duty is your duty as citizen, the culture of the living gods, the person to your friends. Such duties must not be avoided by detaching yourself from the world out of a sense of world weariness. Inner calm is a great thing to achieve, a necessity if we want to judge fair and make good decisions. That is why meditation is important. We root our mind in the deep spiritual levels, we achieve calm that allows us to act. But the Stoa can lead one to refrain from acting, to fall in a sort of apathy. And that is how neither a pagan or a Roman should be. All pagan religions emphasized the heroic soul, the human soul that is daring, courageous, and seeks to expand his horizon. Passive comfort only makes sense as balanced complement to activity and action. 5. Christianity. To Christianity, entire libraries of critique have been written, and I again highlight Alain de Benoist's work on being a pagan for some of the spiritual and philosophical differences. Many of the most fundamental assumptions of monotheism are not just different, but actually entirely opposed to the spiritual and philosophical views of paganism and polytheism, which is why I am quite sharply against any aspiration to connect them. Whether in personal life or as a system, I regard it as a misguided effort, and I can sympathize with on a personal level, but that ultimately means that you are lying to yourself. Monotheism is based on the idea that the world is created, has a beginning and ending, and an eschatological aim, so the entire history in between is just an interlude of little relevancy. And then the true life begins after Armageddon. God of monotheism is the alien, the outsider, while our gods sanctify the world by their presence in it. There is no sin and hence no need for salvation, and especially in reference to Christianity, the idea that someone else suffers to absolve you from your sin is for a pagan deeply amoral. You may read further in my lesson 7, Paganism versus Monotheism. Now, of course, Christianity has elements which are similar to paganism, largely because it had usurped the role of paganism in Europe, so it took vast elements of pagan religiosity into it. But there are some very fundamental differences in the view of the world, which are simply mutually exclusive. But with so much written on the topic, I shall here be content with this summary on my view of that matter. Epilogue. This overview outlines the basic ideas of my philosophy. Now let me clarify finally one thing. While my philosophy, the Schola Aetii, has the same name as the organization which trains priests and cultors, that means I do teach from this point of view, but I do not demand the students or culture to need to share these views. The courses in the Schola Aetii for ritual and priesthood are aimed to enable the culture to perform rituals according to tradition, to reform them with care where he seems it necessary, in a way to still remain compatible with the other Roman cultures. Still, questions such as these I tried to answer here were raised time and again and will likely be asked in the future. For reasons explained in the beginning, I felt the necessity to also create my entirely independent school of philosophy. This text outlines it. Further lectures shall be given to go more details into topics of general interest or relevance. Berlin at the first day of Saturnalia 2771 ab urbe conditio.